Welcome to this edition of When the Biomass Hits the Wind Turbine, a discussion of sustainable living and what that means to you and me. I'm Jay Warmke.
And I'm Annie Warmke.
And today we're going to talk about electric vehicles, or the birth, the death, the rebirth, the death again, and the resurrection of the electric car.
Woo, that's close.
I know. So this is a technology with history.
Wow.
So I'm again, this is in my wheelhouse of techno stuff.
Yeah.
And we could call it about dead white scientists, except a lot of these people aren't dead.
Okay, so just white guys. But anyway, so this is so cool. And I love the whole thing about electric cars, so I'm very enthusiastic about this particular show. And I want you to start out talking about the early days of electric car, because I don't think people know that electric cars have been around since the beginning.
Yeah, really, the electric vehicle was kind of sort of the very first vehicle. The internal combustion engine was a little bit later to the game. But in those early days of electric vehicles, or vehicles per se, if you think about it, the logic would be you take a horse and buggy, and then if you've got some batteries, and the battery goes all the way back to Alessandro Volta and even Benjamin Franklin, playing around with electricity, trying to figure out a way of storing it. Well, they were able to store some of this power, so they said, okay, well, let's now transfer this power into forward motion. So you begin to build electric vehicles. Problem is the battery technology was super, super heavy. So you had really clunky, large, heavy vehicles, didn't go very far.
Yeah, but they were clean.
Oh, they were clean,
that
for
was
sure.
the difference between that internal combustion engine,
Well,
too.
the early internal combustion or gasoline-driven cars were not only dirty, belching smoke and the like, but you had to hand crank those things, which would break your arm, dislocate your shoulder.
Or what if they blow up?
Well, batteries have that problem as well. One of the problems women particularly had is if they wanted to go somewhere, it was a negotiation process. You had to get a driver because the early internal combustion vehicles were not something designed for a woman to drive. I mean, cranking it, getting it started, it was macho. It was a manly kind of thing. So the electric vehicle just started with the push of a button. And a lot of the high society women really looked at this as freedom. I could get into my vehicle. I can go somewhere. It doesn't have to be a negotiating thing. And I can show up in the same condition as when I left.
Clean.
Clean. Your hair's not messed up. You're not covered in soot and smoke and oil and grease and the like. So they were really quite popular. In fact, by 1900, about 40% of all of the automobiles on the road were electric. The thing that really killed it off, a couple of things did. First off, Henry Ford, with the mass production of the Model T, began to lower the cost of an internal combustion engine to the point where the average person could afford it. But then Charles Kettering, a good old Ohio guy, he actually invented the electric starter. So that was really the death nail of the electric vehicle.
Oh, I know, but I just have to say that the real death nail was the fact that women did not make decisions about these things. Men made the decisions.
Well, yeah. But the men.
Well, yeah, that's a really big one.
That just goes without saying.
Oh, come on. Don't be a brat.
But really, it was Kettering with the electric starter. Now you could just start the vehicle without getting in front and breaking your arm.
Well, you still got dirty.
Oh, yeah, but minor.
They had to have special clothing to wear when they drove the vehicle.
And little goggles and stuff.
Yeah.
So the electric vehicle essentially fell upon the scrap heap of history. And we began in the early 1900s our love affair with the internal combustion engine and all of the goodness that provided to our society.
Well, electric cars didn't really go completely away.
Pretty
did they?
much.
They made those little three-wheeled things.
Those were hobbyist things. Really, for all practical purposes, they went away until now. We'll fast forward until to about 1968. And 1968, we saw kind of, think about the late 1960s. You've got the Vietnam War protests.
Everybody getting killed,
Summer
shot.
of Love, Hippy Dippy, and all of this.
Burning L.A. down.
And smog. I mean, smog was huge in L.A. So what ended up happening is a group of students at Caltech got the idea. They were kind of going, somebody's got to clean up this air. It was the automobile was the clear culprit. So they actually had a challenge between Caltech and MIT to have the first cross-country electric car race. And so the team from MIT in Massachusetts they started at their campus, the Caltech people started at their campus, and the first one to reach the other person's campus would be the winner. And that,
in an electric car.
In an electric car, yeah. So the California guys souped up an old Volkswagen van, and the Massachusetts guy souped up, that team souped up a Corvair.
Yeah, but the first thing that comes to mind is, how did they regulate the electrical current?
They didn't very well. I mean, this was really kind of a hobbyist, student, hippy-dippy, let's head out. They did work with utility companies along the way for charging stations. But if you read the account of this race, it was just one disaster after another. They blew up the vehicles several times. They started fires. They had no inverters. Well, they crashed everything. I mean, and the batteries got so hot they had to put ice to cool the batteries, and then the water would make the vehicle electrified, so they had to jump in to avoid
without
getting
touching
shot.
the metal.
And then all this fog would form inside the vehicle, and they couldn't see out. And it was just, I mean, this was really an ordeal. I mean, it was a big deal, but it spurred the imagination of the geek squad. Right. I mean,
but who won?
The California guys did.
Of course.
Well, they didn't actually get there first. They got to MIT after the MIT guys got to Caltech, but they had already decided to impose certain penalties if you had to be towed. So the MIT guys had to be towed quite a lot. And so with all the penalties and everything, it turned out it was like, I forget, 9 days or something. But anyway, they won by 15 minutes.
Wow.
So it was a nice, but what really started there is that these engineering students began to get interested in the electrification of the automobile sort of all over again. So this is early days. Well, then later, another race, and this is kind of the history of the automobile. Races have been the event, the macho event that gets people motivated to innovate, because you're trying to eke out a little bit more power, a little bit more speed, those kind of things. So there was a Danish-born adventurer named Hans Tholstrup, and he was actually lived in Australia. He was well known for taking a little boat around circumnavigate the continent of Australia by himself. When Evel Knievel jumped over a bunch of buses with a motorcycle. This guy jumped over a bunch of motorcycles with a bus, and he was that kind of guy. Well, he had this idea that electric vehicles could really be something that would help save the planet, and this is like 1987. So he started what he referred to as the World Solar Challenge, which was going to be a race from the north of Australia to the south of Australia using only solar vehicles.
Let me interject here, because one of the things that's fascinating to me is to think about what else was going on. Like you like to say, while this was happening over here and over there were some other things happening. So in the late 60s, early 70s, some things that come to mind were young people were so disgruntled by all the violence and the war and things that they said, just forget it. We're going to go back to the land. We don't even have skills to go back to the land, but we're going to go back and start reusing and reinventing things and growing food. And also then we had a president, Mr. Carter, who's turned out to be one heck of a guy. He put solar panels on top of the White House. This was amazing innovation. And he told people, put on a sweater. We got an oil embargo. Gasoline went through the roof in price, or even if the gas station was open. So a lot of things were pushing people to be innovative. We're pushing them to look for other sources of energy and lifestyle and happiness, really, during that time period.
Well, I think that's true. It was an age when people felt like they could change the world and that it had to be changed.
Well, they had to change the world.
Right.
They're thinking,
the end of the world as we know it.
That's right. Anybody over 30, don't trust them because they're destroying them.
Right. But then you get into the 1980s, the post-disco era, where Ronald Reagan comes in, and he's basically given the message of all that nonsense of trying to change the world. Well, let's take the solar panels off the White House. Let's start to dismantle this infrastructure of renewable energy. So there was this pushback. So then when you get somebody who's into it getting pushback, then you begin to get pushback back. So that's what Hans Tholstrup from Australia did, is he said, when Ronald Reagan starts dismantling this stuff, well, how do I get people motivated to see this really can change the world? Well, let's have a big old race. So he sent out all the invitations.
Men love that. They just want to see who's the whatever.
Right.
Say what part of their anatomy is bigger, but they're going for it.
Well, and whatever it takes. So he's kind of going, this is what it's going to take. Let's do it. So he got some pushback. He got BP to be the initial sponsor, British Petroleum, because they were having some PR problems because they had invested heavily in nuclear. And
well, they did other stuff too.
Well,
really
but
bad.
they said, okay, we'll throw $30,000 or whatever your way, and that will make us appear to be green. But then they got some pushback from their buddies in the petroleum industry, so they backed out, and ultimately Hans was able to get General Motors interested, and General Motors, through a lot of different internal, he got a guy who was working for GM who was part of this initial 1960s cross-country electric vehicle race, and he got excited about it. So he pushed it internally in GM, and GM went into this race in a big way, and they invested literally millions of dollars in what became their Sun Racer. And racer spelled Raycer.
Wow.
So isn't that the Sun Ray?
That's innovation.
And these guys really invested a lot of time, money, energy into this thing. They put it into the race, and 1987, they blew everybody away. I mean, it was truly an international competition. And the GM Sun Racer, it made the cross-country trip, I think it was like in just 3 days or something.
Australia?
In Australia, yeah.
But didn't they get like billions of dollars worth of ad?
Oh, yeah, they milked this thing. They took the vehicles to they parked them near the Lincoln Memorial. They had all the congressmen posing. They appeared in almost every single newspaper around the world.
Life magazine, Look
and it
magazine.
It was a pure solar all the way across the continent of Australia. It was pretty cool. But they came up with a lot of innovations through this. And it kind of got Roger Smith at General Motors
He's
interested.
the head guy.
Yeah, he was the head guy. In fact, do you remember that Michael Moore, Roger and Me?
Yeah.
Well, Roger Smith, he was the Roger and Me when he was shutting down all this. And all this was happening
Shutting
about the same
down all
time.
the production of automobile industry in Detroit.
Right. It was kind of a rough time for the automotive industry. So they seized upon this as a bright spot. It's like this is something we can show that we're an amazingly innovative company. So before we go on with our tale of daring do across the continent of Australia, let me remind you that you are listening to When the Biomass Hits the Wind Turbine with Jay and Annie Warmke, and we are reminding you it is the end of the world as we know it.
And thank God, really.
Right. And it is
Absolutely.
the end of the vehicles as
we know it. That's right. That's
Well,
what we're talking about right now.
And the innovation that came about by this cross-country Australian race was substantial. We don't want to minimize it because it has the people who were involved in it and the technologies that they came to develop as part of it have literally led us to the electric vehicle of today, the Teslas, even the Prius Prime, which we just recently purchased.
Yeah, Toyota.
Yes. What do you call your Prius Prime?
Etta May. She's very beautiful. She drives like a race car. She holds the road. She is a thing of beauty.
Thing of beauty. And
we waited 15 years in our business plan to finally get her, because before you had to live in California.
And this, the Prius Prime is the world's best-selling plug-in hybrid. And it has a motor,
We're charging Toyota for this commercial.
Yes, I know. But it also, in combination with the electric and the gas engine, has been getting around 100 miles to the gallon, which is pretty amazing. Amazing.
And the battery has a warranty of 150,000 miles, so we aren't going to be buying another car anytime soon.
Right. Let's hope not. So anyway, let's see. Where was I with our intrepid
They won the race. They had big ads. They got lots of publicity, but innovation came. A lot of innovation came, like regenerative.
Right.
What you call that?
Regenerative braking when you're going downhill. Although that's an early innovation. That was in the 1900s vehicles, which is hard to imagine. But they would actually recharge the battery through braking. So some of these technologies are old. So anyway, Roger Smith got a little bit carried away with his own PR, and he had GM start on a program. They called it the Impact, which was a concept car, a fully electric vehicle, taking some of what they had learned. And when they had their show, it was the Automotive Show 1990 in L.A., he announced this vehicle. In fact, a lot of people in GM didn't want him to, because they were afraid, first off, it's not ready. But secondly, this is a major thing, and you're doing it without a whole lot of thought. Well, it turns out they were right, at least from GM's standpoint, because the California Air Resources Board, which is in charge of some of the air pollution regulations in the state of California, they kind of came back after this 1990 show and said, hey, if you guys are this far along, we're going to put in some rules here in California that say that by 1998, we want to have 2% of all of the cars sold in the state of California emission-free, zero emissions.
So basically, in a decade, they're going to turn the industry around.
Right. Well, within 8 years, they want 2% of the cars. That sounds like a little, but it's a lot. Then they said by 2001, we want 5%, and by 2003, 10% of all the cars. Basically, 10% of all the cars by 2003 will be fully electric in the state of California. Well, this kind of freaked out the automobile industry because, first off, GM, who was far and ahead of everybody else, they weren't even anywhere close to this. So there began this large lobbying campaign against these regulations. How do we stop this from happening?
Well, think about all the industry that would have been trying to stop it. The fossil fuel industry, which is huge. The metals industry. I mean, an
whole bunch of
amazing
congressmen.
Yeah.
And California, of course, not being a federal agency and, the land of fruits and nuts, as they like to say, California.
Fruit and honey.
Okay, milk and honey. That's your idea. Anyway, so they held firm. They began to basically be the tail that wagged the dog because the entire automotive industry had to respond to California because it's a big market and you don't want to give up that market. So that was a twofold approach. The lobbyists began to try and do away with the law, but in the meantime, all these companies started developing electric vehicles just in case. GM they developed what became the EV1, which was immortalized in the movie Who Killed the Electric Car, where they sent out a number of these things. They didn't really want to sell them, but they leased them. People who drove them absolutely loved them. And then they started gathering them up and destroying them. Because from GM's standpoint, it was a hedge your bet, but we don't want this side of our bet to win. So they really it was doomed from the beginning, even though they succeeded.
Poisoned the well.
Well, and it was really a mess on their part. And all the good that they got, the good publicity they got from the original race in 1987, pretty much went to the wayside, as by 2003, they had pretty well destroyed their warm and fuzzies.
You know, it reminds me of when they came in, when Dodge and some of those other companies came in and said, we're going to get rid of all the mass transportation and just started buying up the buses because then you had to buy a car.
Yeah, that was
It's the same kind of thinking.
So anyway, and of course the California rules, because the automobile industry did not respond, they had to be revised, and they've been revised several times. The revision today is that the market basically says that they want 5% of the vehicles in California by 2020 to be fully electric. And they're moving in that direction, but they're looking at 15% by 2025. So they're still pushing it.
Well, and the car industry is in some regard perhaps responding, because it seems like every major car company is developing or has developed some sort of an electric vehicle to be on the market.
Oh, sure. And in fact, the Prius was a response to these early California mandates where Toyota began on their hybrid. And so the success of the Prius can be directly linked back to those early regulations in California. And the Prius has been a huge success story in the automotive industry.
But it's also interesting that this huge industry of car manufacturers could not identify that there are a group of people who would purchase a car like the Prius, no matter what the cost, and care for that car and so many people I know that have bought Prius, then when that Prius, maybe they've leased it or whatever, or they pass it on to their kids and they buy another Prius because it's such a great car.
And very economical. And
we've owned 4 of them, and we think they're a really great vehicle.
Mm-hmm. Well, another thing that came about from that whole who killed the electric car is a lot of the players who were involved in the development of the EV1. They felt absolutely betrayed. And a couple of those guys actually went on to form a company known as Tesla Motors. and it was really just a reaction saying, look, I like the idea, love the idea of this vehicle. The other thing you need to understand is electric vehicles are performers. You know, these are, if you're one of those motorhead guys who was into souping up vehicles, the electric vehicle has so much torque, so much speed that the guys who formed Tesla were saying, let's build ourselves a sports car using electric technology, because the electric technology is 3 times as efficient but a lot more sporty than the internal combustion engine.
The other thing, though, that happened was there was a couple, a man and a woman, married people, who developed a really amazing battery technology.
Yeah.
And they came along and bought up the rights to that and then totally destroyed everything.
Well, that was part of the whole GM controversy, which was outlined. But it was really Tesla where a lot of the foundation with Tesla Motors was taking this idea of lithium-ion batteries, which was a different technology, and saying, okay, it's working in computers, it's working in cell phones. How about if we make this work in cars? And that was kind of the big step that was needed to make this practical and to make it work. So the 2 fellas who started up the company, it was a fellow named Martin Eberhard and Mark Tarpening, something like that. Anyway, they started it up, but they were engineers and not exactly flush with a lot of cash. It really wasn't until Elon Musk came in, having made a ton of money in PayPal. He came in, invested, and with his showmanship.
Yeah, he's a marketer. Yeah. That's what they needed.
Yeah, he was able to. Now, he may be a little bit wacko, but I
think he's gotten worse.
Yeah, well, but he's the guy who really pushed it forward. And today, the Tesla really is far and away the best seller. In fact, when I was looking at a list of what are the electric vehicles that are selling the most in the U.S., the 2019, the Tesla Model 3, which is their latest, accounts for 63% of the electric vehicles sold in the United States.
Well, because people that have a lot of money are on a waiting list actually to buy these vehicles.
Well, the Tesla Model 3 is their low-cost version, so
Yeah.
it's in the 30,000s range. The Model X, which is their sort of second tier, like the $80,000 car, that's number 2. Number 3 is the Chevy Bolt, and then number 4 is the Tesla Model S, which is their luxury
Yeah,
vehicle.
so I rest my case.
Then you get the Nissan Leaf, then there's a BMW, a Volkswagen, an Audi, a Jaguar, and the smart car, the little smart EQ. But the top plug-in hybrids, which is what we have, is Prius Prime.
Yep, because it's
There
good at
you
what
go.
it does. So what's different this time around than was when they were trying to do this before?
Well, some of the big differences, it's like that old Zen thing. When the student is ready, a teacher will appear.
Up here.
Well, when the technology is ready, a market will appear. So what we're seeing is everything's coming together all at the same time. The battery technology is coming together. The price of lithium-ion batteries has dropped dramatically, like 1/10 of what it was when Tesla first began. So now you're able to build a car because the cost of the lithium-ion battery is about 1/3 the cost of the vehicle. So if that cost is now 1/10 of what it was, the vehicle becomes more and more affordable.
But isn't lithium? It's not really that plentiful, is it?
Well, it is plentiful, but it's not sustainable. The countries where it is mined, like Argentina, Bolivia, and Chile, there's a lot of extraction issues. It's like digging for oil or mining coal. The poor countries that are based on extraction economies always suffer. So we have to come up with a better way. But this is
It's a transition.
it's getting us there.
Yeah, it's getting us on the right path.
Yeah. So the
Although
other
that's
issue.
not justification, but that's another story.
The other thing with electric vehicles has always been range. You
Right.
can't go very far. Well, Teslas, those get like 300, 350 miles on a charge.
Ours gets 25.
Well, but it's a plug-in
Yeah.
hybrid, so it's not. Then the other issue is how long does it take to recharge the vehicle? Well, now they're looking at some rapid charging stations that will recharge the vehicle in minutes, like 80% charge in 10-minute kind of thing. So now you don't have to sit around and wait for hours.
Just
for
stop
this
and get
vehicle.
something to eat and come out and you've recharged your battery.
Yeah, well,
In
all
more
of
ways
these,
than one.
all of these are leading to a situation where, we're looking at by 2040, which is only 20 years in the future, we're going to have the majority of the vehicles sold in the world are going to be electric, which is amazing. I mean, we may be experiencing at this moment peak gasoline engine vehicles. Like this may be this year, who knows, maybe the peak. So
Well,
everything
we're
is
definitely
changing.
close if we're not there.
So anyway, the world is indeed changing, and we want to thank you for listening to When the Biomass Hits the Wind Turbine with Jay and Annie Warmke. We want to thank our award-winning producer, Adam Rich, and we want to thank you for spending just a little bit of time with us. And as your grandmother hopefully told you, the secret to a happy and sustainable life is...
Play nice with others, clean up your own mess, and my grandma loved to drive fast, so don't drive too fast.
and drive electric.
Yes.
Till next time.
Mother Earth will sing, and her children will be see the morning glory blossom in the night. Know the stars are dancing in twilight. Soon we'll be together, all will be revealed. Mother Earth will sing, and her children will be
You can find more information on living sustainably in our unsustainable world at bluerockstation.com.
yeah.